So thank you for joining us this morning, and we're happy that you're here. Welcome you to today's program, Mosquito-borne Infections in New York State. And now I will introduce our speaker, Jennifer White. Jen joined the New York State Department of Health as an epidemiologist in 1999, and she has spent the last 17 years working in vector-borne disease surveillance and research. Currently, she serves as the director of the Vector-borne Disease Unit within the Bureau of Communicable Disease Control, where she coordinates human and vector surveillance and research activities related to tick and mosquito-borne diseases. Her research interests include exploring novel methods of vector-borne disease surveillance and prevention and developing alternative surveillance methodologies for vector-borne diseases. Today, she's going to be sharing with us information about mosquito-borne diseases that are transmitted in New York, and also about some mosquito-borne diseases that you could see if you're traveling. And she's also going to tell us how mosquito-borne disease transmission occurs and how to protect ourselves from getting infected. And now I turn it over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me today. Thank you all for joining. I use she, her pronouns as well. Jennifer or Jen is perfectly fine to call me. What I'll be doing is turning off my camera, sharing my screen. I'll turn my camera back on for questions, but I just want to be sure that my streaming goes as smoothly as possible. So stopping video, sharing my presentation now. Please let me know if you can all see my slides okay.
Yes, I can see them.
Perfect. Thank you. Slideshow. Are you seeing my slideshow or just my slides?
All of the slides, including the sidebar.
Okay. Let's see. How about now? Better?
Yes, that's just this. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I thought I would get started this morning with a bit of a primer on mosquitoes, including the species that are most often involved in disease transmission, as well as transmission dynamics and factors influencing disease risk. So worldwide, mosquito-borne diseases account for about 17% of all infectious diseases. Pathogenic agents range from parasites to bacteria and viruses. Many of these diseases can be severe, leading to an estimated 700,000 deaths annually worldwide. Fortunately, here in the United States, disease burden and fatality rates are lower than in other parts of the world. We do, however, have more than 200 species of mosquitoes in the US, but only a subset of these, about 12, transmit human disease. Many others are just nuisance mosquitoes, but are not involved in disease transmission. More specifically, here in New York State, we have about 60 to 70 species of mosquitoes. And of these, there are 5 main genera that contribute to human disease. So just to give you a little bit of additional information about those 5 major genera I just mentioned on the last slide, and these are the diseases that these vectors can transmit. I'll discuss a few of these in more detail as I talk more specifically about mosquito-borne diseases that are endemic to New York State, but for now, this is just an overview. The first species on this list, or genera on this list, is Aedes. And of note, when we're talking about Aedes mosquitoes, some of you may have heard of Aedes aegypti. It's the most common vector of dengue, yellow fever, some people call it the yellow fever mosquito, chikungunya, and Zika viruses, but it's not found in New York State. It's more common in the tropics as well as the southeastern part of the United States. We do have a cousin mosquito here in New York State. The name of that species is Aedes albopictus, and it's an invasive species from Asia. At this time, we've only identified that mosquito downstate. It's thought that cold temperatures may limit the northward movement of that mosquito currently. While a potential concern when it comes to local transmission of diseases like dengue and Zika virus, it's less efficient as a vector species than Aedes aegypti. So while we could potentially see and have seen local transmission of something like dengue virus, it doesn't tend to be widespread transmission, but just a one-off here or there. The next genera on the list is Anopheles mosquitoes, which are responsible for malaria transmission. Next, we have Cocolatidia. And one of the main species here that we think about in New York State is Cocolatidia perturbans. And that's a mosquito that does transmit West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis. Culex mosquitoes are very common in New York State, namely Culex pipiens and Culex restuans. But it's important to note again that as with the Coquilitidia, these are responsible for local transmission of things like West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis. And last but not least, I have on this slide Culiceta. Culiceta mosquitoes are involved in Eastern equine encephalitis transmission. But what's important to know about this species is that they tend to bite birds. So really, this species is involved in sort of amplifying the amount of virus that is present in the environment, but won't necessarily choose to bite a person. Sort of birds are preferred, but I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about mosquito transmission. So the mosquito life cycle has 4 distinct stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. 3 of these 4 stages, everything except the adult, require the presence of water for the mosquito to grow and develop into the next life stage. For adult mosquitoes, males don't blood feed. That's sort of a fun fact. Only females do. Male mosquitoes basically persist on nectar, while females feed on nectar, but they also require a blood meal to get the proteins they need for egg development. And after mating and blood feeding, the female will lay her eggs on the surface of a still body of water and the cycle starts over. Knowing that mosquito biology requires water is very important when we think about things like mosquito-borne disease prevention and mosquito control. So taking a closer look at the order of events that take place for mosquito-borne pathogens to circulate through the mosquito-animal cycle, first, an adult female mosquito needs to take a blood meal from a potentially infected animal. The blood enters the mosquito's gut, where, if it's infected, the pathogen will move from the gut into the body of the mosquito. The pathogen then replicates in the mosquito's body, so the virus sort of strengthens while in the mosquito's body and eventually migrates to the salivary glands of the mosquito. The next time the mosquito takes a blood meal, the pathogen is injected along with the mosquito's saliva at the site of the bite. And finally, depending on the host species, the animal that was newly bitten may experience disease or contribute to amplify that pathogen, that virus, in the population of reservoirs. These are some of the mosquito-borne diseases we see cases of here in New York State. The diseases in bold are those that are endemic to New York State, though they vary in frequency. The other diseases are diseases that we typically see pop up as a result of travelers returning from countries where the disease is endemic, or part of the United States, perhaps, where disease may be circulating. We see cases of West Nile virus disease every year, and we see Eastern equine encephalitis activity just about every year, but the others tend to be less common. Those other diseases in bold that we can find in New York State, they do tend to be less common with numbers in the single digits, if any, in any given year. Let's take a closer look at some of the more important mosquito-borne infections that are locally transmitted in New York. West Nile virus primarily cycles between mosquito vectors and bird reservoirs, as shown in that diagram on the right. The cycle will spill over into non-avian species like humans and horses, both of which are dead-end hosts for West Nile virus, meaning that an uninfected mosquito that feeds on an infected horse or human won't become infected and won't be able to transmit the pathogen to another host. Humans and horses can develop disease. However, not everyone who is infected with West Nile virus will experience symptoms. Approximately 1 in 5 people who are infected will develop fever or other more flu-like symptoms, while a much smaller proportion, about 1 in 150, will develop serious and potentially fatal illness. Eastern equine encephalitis virus, we also call it triple E, is another mosquito-borne disease endemic to New York State. Very rare, but it's a disease we are very concerned about when we see it in mosquito species or horses or people each year because it has a very high case fatality rate. Like West Nile virus, it circulates primarily in a mosquito-bird cycle. Most of the positive mosquitoes we see are that Culiceta genera that I mentioned earlier before, specifically this Culiceta melanura mosquito. And again, that mosquito feeds almost exclusively on birds. It's only after the virus has circulated and been amplified in that bird population that bridge vectors are other mosquito species that tend to feed on both birds and mammals, something like Coccolatidia perturbans, which I mentioned on that prior slide. They begin to pick up that infection, and then they can transmit it to mammalian hosts. Humans and horses both are particularly susceptible to disease if EEE takes hold. In fact, when a horse gets EEE, it's just about invariably fatal, and symptoms resemble that of rabies. So horses are usually tested for rabies first, and if rabies testing is negative, they'll be tested for Eastern equine encephalitis and likely EEE as well. So vector-borne pathogens involve notoriously complex interactions due to the involvement of multiple stages in their life cycle. It's a feature that makes them very interesting, but as researchers, it can be frustrating to study them because there are so many moving parts. Listed here are some of the factors that contribute to the risk of mosquito-borne pathogen transmission. In the northeastern U.S., mosquito-borne diseases are strongly seasonal, which I'm sure most of you would have guessed, aligning with mosquito season in those periods of time during which mosquitoes are most active, usually May, about now, the last half of May to October/November. Here we see the seasonality of West Nile virus in New York State in this graph on the right, and the majority of cases occur in just 3 months in the late summer and early fall. Time of day is another big factor. Some species of mosquitoes tend to be morning and evening biters, sort of that dusk and dawn activity you may have heard about, while others will bite all day long. Many mosquito-borne pathogens depend on animal reservoirs. The presence of those species is also necessary for these diseases to persist. Geographical region is also important in determining which mosquito species are present, which again can affect the types of pathogens that can be present in the area. It's also important to recognize that though an appropriate vector species may be present in a given geographical range, it doesn't necessarily mean all associated pathogens are also present. And lastly, environmental conditions can play a big role. Things like habitat, temperature, and precipitation contribute to which mosquitoes can survive and reproduce in a given area, as well as which wildlife reservoir species might be present to act as a source of infection. Now we'll cover a little bit about the epidemiology of mosquito-borne diseases in New York State. So these are the case numbers for endemic arboviral diseases in New York State from 2013 to 2023. You can see there I have Eastern equine encephalitis, Jamestown Canyon, St. Louis encephalitis, and West Nile virus. As you can see, West Nile virus is our hardest hitter when it comes to our endemic diseases. Not shown on this graph is 2024 data, but that was a banner year as well. And you can see the height of that purple bar in 2018. That's about comparable to what we saw in 2024. We also had 2 human cases of Eastern equine encephalitis in 2024 in Ulster County, New York. That was the first finding of human cases of EEE since 2015 and was in an area atypical for EEE activity. But you can see here, West Nile's our hardest hitter. Sometimes, very sporadic Jamestown Canyon cases, and again, a little bit of EEE, which we hadn't seen since 2015 and saw quite a bit of in 2024. Looking at our non-endemic diseases, again, these are the diseases that we tend to see associated with travel. Featured on this graph are chikungunya, dengue, malaria, yellow fever, and Zika. You can see here, the major players tend to be dengue and malaria each year. But you can also see here the impact of global outbreaks of chikungunya in 2014 and Zika virus in 2016. So I have here some maps that were sort of focusing on 2024 because it was a really interesting year. There was a striking amount of mosquito-borne disease, both West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis. For West Nile virus, we had 101 human cases, 36 in New York City and 65 in the rest of the state, when for the previous 3 years, we had averaged only about 66 cases per year. And for Eastern equine encephalitis, it was a truly unprecedented year. Anything that shaded solid blue or dark blue in this slide shows the breadth and geographic scope of where we had Eastern equine encephalitis virus last year. Again, after having not seen a human case in New York State for nearly 10 years, we saw 2 in an area of New York State where we don't normally see triple E activity. There's a 4-county area in central New York. You can see on the map, that's Oswego, Onondaga, Madison, and Oneida counties. That's where we tend to see triple E activity every year due to the presence of a large area of swampland that tends to be the ecologic engine that drives triple E activity, with activity predominantly focused in those Culicida melanura mosquitoes and birds, but does occasionally spill over to mammals, usually horses, and sadly, occasionally humans. But in 2024, we saw triple E activity across a large portion of New York State, where we might see a handful of horses with triple E each year. That particular year, last year, we saw 22, including from counties where we historically never seen triple E activity before. The whys of this, we aren't quite sure of, but we're trying to investigate to see what we can learn, or if we can learn anything to help us predict seasons like this moving forward. But we're honestly a little bit anxious about what 2025 might hold. I'll present just a few slides now on mosquito-borne disease diagnosis. So as I mentioned before, when we're talking about mosquito-borne diseases, thankfully, most infections are asymptomatic. In the case of West Nile virus, for example, about 8 in 10 people infected with West Nile virus will not develop any symptoms. Some infections will lead to febrile illness. If we're talking about West Nile virus, about 1 in 5 people who are infected develop a fever and other mild symptoms. Febrile illness is also associated with many non-endemic mosquito-borne diseases, so travel-associated diseases, including malaria, chikungunya, dengue, and Zika viruses. As with West Nile virus, depending on the pathogen involved in these diseases, patients can also get headache, body aches, joint pain, GI symptoms, and rash. But unfortunately, some individuals will develop severe illness. In the case of West Nile virus, it's about 1 in 150 people that develop encephalitis or meningitis. Symptoms can include high fever, headache, neck stiffness, disorientation, coma, and severe illness can occur in people of any age. However, people over 60 years of age are at greater risk for severe illness if they become infected. And people with certain underlying medical conditions like cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, and people who've received organ transplants are also at greater risk. Recovery from serious illness might take several weeks or months, and some effects can be permanent. And as mentioned here, sometimes these infections can lead to death. Case fatality rates do vary by disease, with about 1 in 10 people with West Nile virus who develop severe illness dying. And the case fatality rate, as I mentioned before, for triple E is higher, but it's generally at 33 to 41%. So we're much more concerned about fatalities when we're talking about triple E. Oops. Mosquito-borne disease diagnosis. Here, this is one of the things we try to educate healthcare providers on, the importance of collecting a detailed travel history. When collecting travel histories, we encourage healthcare providers to ask about specific locations of travel, even within endemic countries. So for instance, my patient says they traveled to India, finding out where in India would be very important. The dates of the travel, the duration of stay, those things seem relatively obvious, right, when we're thinking about incubation periods of diseases. But it's also important to ask about exposure history. And this we don't find being asked about as often. And things that we're thinking about here are like, what activities did you do? It's important to know whether or not someone stayed camping, someone stayed with family, if they stayed at a hotel, things like window screens and mosquito-borne disease prevention. That can be really important to know. Did the traveler have any vaccinations prior to travel or take any pre-exposure prophylaxis in the case of malaria? And also asking about exposure to returning travelers if mosquito-borne disease is suspected, particularly if the patient hasn't traveled, but a mosquito-borne disease is suspected. Again, sometimes we're on a little bit of a heightened alert when we know that a whole family comes back and say has something like malaria, and someone who lives in the same household who didn't travel gets malaria, then we start to think about mosquito-borne transmission occurring locally. As far as treatment goes, it depends upon the infectious agent, but for all of these arboviral infections, so any of the viruses I mentioned, the only treatment is supportive care. For malaria, anti-malarial treatments do exist, however, and all of that information can be found on CDC's website or by contacting the CDC malaria hotline. Mosquito surveillance. So here you can see a little bit about what we do by way of mosquito surveillance. Mosquito surveillance is sort of a county and state collaborative effort. Mosquito sampling occurs at the county level. About 13 counties actually go out and collect mosquito samples. They will identify those mosquitoes, pool them, basically means they put mosquitoes that are the same species that were collected the same day into a group, and they send that to the New York State Department of Health for pathogen testing, where we test those mosquitoes for virus. We report back out to the county health department, and then both the county health department and the state health department do public messaging. Sometimes county health departments will also do mosquito control, but regardless, we can also monitor mosquito populations to see if population size is increasing, if viral illness or viral infection, is increasing in those mosquitoes as well. So the cycle sort of goes around and around and around from this time of year all the way through October as a rule, depending on resources. At this slide, we had about 12 counties performing active mosquito surveillance. We had another county come on board this year. New York City does mosquito surveillance as well, separately. But overall, we have greater than 320 trap sites across New York State that are monitoring mosquito populations. You can see here some of the tools we use for mosquito surveillance. Over to the right, you'll see a dipper in a red bucket. That's for collecting mosquito larvae. These are the immature stage of mosquito, which we can still at that point consider treating with bacterial dunks. It's a harmless bacteria that we can control mosquito populations with. And then in the orange box on the left, you can see different types of mosquito traps that we use when we go out and do mosquito surveillance. Some use attractants like light and carbon dioxide, while others do use a solution that's, we often call it the stinky cat food, where we try to make a very nasty solution that female mosquitoes that are getting ready to lay eggs will like to lay their eggs in. And we can collect all those mosquitoes and send them into the lab for testing. So finally, I'll finish up with a little bit of information on mosquito-borne disease prevention. So prevention focuses on a couple of different things. One of the main areas that we use when we're talking about mosquito-borne disease prevention is increasing awareness. And increasing awareness can come through the distribution of health alerts, both at the local level and at the state level, press releases, healthcare provider outreach. That's a key feature of what we do. We're getting ready to put out our seasonal healthcare provider advisory. It should go out in the next few weeks. And that reminds providers about what we are seeing in terms of mosquito-borne disease, reminds providers about how they can have patients tested, how and where, and what appropriate specimens are, and also reminds healthcare providers the importance of reporting to the New York State Department of Health when they have someone who they suspect has a mosquito-borne illness. The New York State Department of Health also puts out a mosquito-borne illness weekly report that's found on the New York State Department of Health public website. We do that every week from early July until late November, and then we usually do a final year-end report in December, and that focuses on our endemic mosquito-borne diseases, namely Triple E and West Nile, but we also do include information on chikungunya, malaria, dengue, Zika, and letting the public know how many cases we have, but if any of those were locally transmitted as well. And all of our prevention methods revolve around a few things. Eliminating standing water in containers is really important. As I mentioned early on, since 3 of 4 mosquito life stages require water to advance to the next life stage, if we can eliminate standing water, we can help to eliminate mosquito populations. I think, folks are obviously thinking about, like koi ponds where the fish aren't living anymore and it's sort of a stagnant pool, or a backyard pool that isn't being used anymore. But mosquitoes can actually breed in water as small as that you'd find in like a soda bottle cap. So being really cognizant of where on your property you can remove standing water and help prevent mosquito populations is really important. We obviously talk about clothing and repellent use as well. We encourage individuals to, wear long sleeves, wear long pants when they're going to be out, particularly at dusk and dawn during mosquito season. And we also stress the importance of repellent use. Repellents like DEET, but there are several others, when used according to the labeled directions, can be very safe and effective when it comes to preventing mosquito bites and mosquito-borne disease. And lastly, sometimes we focus on outdoor activity regulation as well. And by that, I basically just mean limiting activities at dusk and dawn, particularly if there is a high level of mosquito-borne disease in your area. And the particular vectors that we're concerned about tend to be biters at dusk and dawn. Another feature of mosquito-borne disease prevention is mosquito control. Mosquito control is entirely the purview of the local health department, so all of your county health departments are the ones that make these decisions. There are two major types. I mentioned larviciding before. You can see in the upper corner there, the mosquito dunks. There's a bacteria in there that's harmful to mosquitoes, but not to other species, and that can be used in contained bodies of water to eliminate mosquito larvae. And if you eliminate mosquito larvae, you have fewer adults. Adulticiding is another method of mosquito control. You can see here a truck that's spraying, as well as a small aircraft that's spraying pesticide. And those adulticiding efforts do exactly that. They attempt to kill adult mosquito species that are out and flying around. Oftentimes, it takes more than one application. A county will need to spray once to kill the adult mosquitoes, and then often needs to spray a second time as more of those immature mosquitoes become adults. So that's all the content I have. I certainly have time for questions, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. My contact information is here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to come back to the main slide, and I'm going to turn my camera on. So if anyone has questions, I would welcome them.
So we have 14 people today, so if you have questions, you can either put them in chat or ask in person.
Don't be afraid to go outdoors. That's the goal. So part of what we do at the state health department actually is we're in the middle of tick collections now. So we're going out in the field and trying to collect ticks and bring them back to test them for the presence of pathogens. Mosquito collections are largely done by county health departments, but tick collections are usually done just by state employees. So we're out in the field all the time, and we don't use repellent when we're out in the field because we don't want to drive the ticks away. And knock on wood, we're a healthy group. So, there's a lot you can do to prevent these things from infecting you. And we really hope that folks will continue to, consider using repellent, cover your body, but do, whatever you can otherwise to prevent infection. And I see a question from Teresa. Sites for collection do include Long Island. Suffolk County, Nassau County, collections occur there. Suffolk County has a really, really robust mosquito surveillance and control program as well. On Long Island, a lot of their mosquito control is not just targeting some of those species that I mentioned that carry disease. Long Island, it's really, you can't live on Long Island without mosquito control of nuisance species as well. So there is a lot that occurs there. I did put my email address too in the chat, just because sometimes, if you're thinking about this later or you have another question or one of the people that you work with has a question, I'm happy to have you reach out to me at a later time.
Thank you. We'll share that out. Also, Jessica has shared our survey, and we ask that you provide feedback on the presentation today.
And if anyone is interested in vector-borne disease prevention materials, both mosquito and tick-borne disease prevention materials, they can be ordered free of charge if you visit the link that I just put in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all.
I do have a question. I saw the picture with the many different kinds of sprays.
Mhm.
Are there any natural sprays? I know some people prefer to have some natural rather than some of the chemically ones. And also unscented. I know some people who like to go out in the woods and have, or any area and have like chemical sensitivity. So
Yes.
any
It's a
like
good
that?
question. It's one we get a lot. And when I talk about this, I'm going to sort of include ticks in the same thing, right? Because ticks and mosquitoes, it's important to protect yourself from both. Some of the studies that we have done show that, some of the things that are marketed as natural repellents are not as effective at repelling ticks and mosquitoes. There's a list of, there's a number of products you can use. So we usually encourage folks, if you don't like products with DEET for some reason, try picaridin or IR3535. There are other products, oil of lemon eucalyptus, for instance. But it's important to read the label because some of those things are more effective at repelling ticks versus those that are effective at repelling mosquitoes. What I will say for mosquito-borne disease prevention specifically, and we try to educate folks when we go to the state fair every year for the entirety of it, and we have a booth and we talk to folks. And one of the things we talk about there is to look and find the product that's right for the job. For instance, if you're thinking about tick-borne diseases, you don't need deep woods off, mosquito-borne diseases. If you don't need deep woods off if you're going to, go out in your yard and garden for an hour. The strength of those repellents is based on how long they last, not how effective they are. So if you're not comfortable using deep woods off because it's a higher percentage of repellent when it comes to mosquitoes, you can use a lower percentage. You just have to apply it more frequently. And I think that helps folks as well. Ticks, you really do need a percentage about 20 to 30% in order to repel ticks effectively. But there's another product out called permethrin that we've had a lot of success with, and we're going to try to do an educational campaign with that later this year. Permethrin is something you don't put on your skin, but you put on your clothing. You can also buy clothing that's impregnated with it from your outdoor stores like LL Bean or Cabela or REI. They all sell clothes that are impregnated with it, or you can treat your own clothes. And it lasts for a number of washings. Like I said, you don't put it on your skin, but when you put it on your clothing, it effectively repels insects for the amount of time that product is effective. Like there could be up to 40 washes for some of the products. It's very cool. And I think we're trying to encourage folks who may be a little bit leery about repellent. I laugh every year at the state fair because I think every single year since we have gone there, I have encountered, it's always a wife who says, I'm going to spray my husband's stuff. He won't even know I did it, but I want to keep him safe from mosquitoes and ticks when he's out hunting or whatever. And every single year someone says it. It always makes me laugh like they're doing it in secret. But it is one of those things that tends to give people a lot of comfort. And it's another layer, right? It doesn't take away from needing to use repellent. But if I forget and I go out to garden, at least I know my sneakers have permethrin on them. The pants that my husband uses when he mows the lawn are permethrin treated. So even if he doesn't take that step of putting on repellent, it's another layer of prevention.
It's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, here's one. Matt asked, can we crumble up those mosquito donuts and put a little bit of them if we only find a very small amount of water?
Absolutely. Yep, that's encouraged. The amount of that dunk product to use those donuts is on the label. And those can be found at, I saw them a couple weeks ago at Home Depot. They're around. They're not that hard to find. And yes, you use the amount that's appropriate for the water on your property. But what's important to note is that if, like, I have a little creek in my backyard, but I can't use it there because that creek is not solely contained on my property and actually leads to, other bodies of water. But, if you have a koi pond, if there's fish in it, you're golden because they'll eat the larvae. But, a koi pond that's just water and isn't circulating, sort of stagnant, you can use it there. Folks have, well water, there's cisterns, there's other things that people may have on their property. A lot of people have rain barrels so they can water their plants from that. Those are the things it's perfect to use in.
That just reminded me of a question. If we put that in a pond, is it going to harm our dog if they drank out of the pond?
Nope, it's safe for dogs, it's safe for fish. It really just targets those mosquitoes. It's actually a natural bacteria, but it only harms mosquitoes. And I see a question about the carbon dioxide traps work. They do work. It's one of the baits that we use to collect mosquitoes as well. But I think as with anything else, certain brands, certain types may work better than others, but carbon dioxide does attract mosquitoes. Like I said, it's one of the baits we use. Light and carbon dioxide are two of the things we use to attract mosquitoes to our traps so we can collect them and send them in for testing.
I have a question. Have you heard of the bug bite thing? It's this device that provides a suction that takes away the itch in
I have heard
mosquito
of it.
bites.
I have not tried it though, and I don't know how or why it works.
Yeah, I mean, it was talking about that it could actually expel whatever the mosquito has put into the bite, but I've seen that disputed as to whether
Yeah,
or not you could actually
that
take
part would give me pause that it might, I
the,
can't, perhaps some saliva contents, but I certainly wouldn't think it would, protect against viral transmission, something like that. That's pretty quick.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
It's a good question though. I have one child that I swear is just a magnet, and she really, when she gets bitten badly and really swells up. And I've wondered if things like that work.
I have a friend who is a tick magnet.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, there's that too.
she can walk through a field and end up with like a dozen ticks, and I have none.
We've
It's
talked about that. It's sort of an interesting, there's something about body chemistry that they think is really involved. There's pheromones or something else. Our carbon dioxide alone attracts mosquitoes and attracts ticks as well. But what it is about our body chemistry otherwise that makes some people quote unquote magnets, like you said, for ticks or mosquitoes is really a curious phenomenon. And it makes you wonder for the people that are not drawn to them, if they could somehow create a substance that everybody could wear that would sort of keep them off in the same way. That's sort of the holy grail. I will say too, I know we're talking about mosquitoes today, but as far as ticks are concerned, there is a tick vaccine or a Lyme disease vaccine, I should say, that should be coming to market in the next few years, which will obviously be another tool you add to your toolbox when you're talking about tick-borne disease prevention. But sort of the holy grail for tick-borne disease prevention would be a vaccine where if a tick bites you, it drops off before it can transmit anything. Lyme, babesiosis, whatever. So that's sort of the holy grail, is to prevent all tick-borne diseases. And, it'd be nice if we could find something about that for mosquitoes too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I thank you, Jen, for this presentation today and all the information. And we will share the information out. And like I said, the presentation was recorded. We'll post it to our YouTube channel, and everybody will be able to access it there.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and the warm welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I'm going to be ending the program. Thanks everybody for joining.